This story follows the son of a powerful billionaire who had everything money could buy, except success. He failed every test, every subject, and every expectation until a new maid entered the mansion. But she wasn't just there to clean. She carried lessons that no school or tutor ever could. What happened next shook the entire family and transformed the boy's destiny forever. Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss any update in future. He was the son of a billionaire. The world expected greatness from him the moment he was born. The newspapers wrote about his first birthday party as if it were a royal event. His father's name alone could open doors that most people could only dream of. He lived inside a mansion so big, most people would get lost just trying to find the kitchen. Expensive tutors were hired, private schools were selected, and the best opportunities were laid in front of him like a red carpet. But behind the golden gates of that life, there was a truth no one wanted to admit. The boy was a complete failure. He failed every exam. Every test paper he submitted was either blank, scribbled, or filled with wrong answers. Teachers gave up on him. Tutors walked away shaking their heads. Even the most patient mentors couldn't make him focus for more than a few minutes. He wasn't just bad at studies, he was hopeless. His father, a man who turned dust into diamonds in the business world, couldn't believe his own blood could be such a disappointment. At dinner tables, his father's silence cut deeper than any insult. His classmates whispered about him being the dumbest rich kid they had ever seen. And slowly, the boy himself started to believe it. But the humiliation didn't stop there. At every family gathering, relatives compared him to other children. Look at them. They're topping their classes, winning medals, making their parents proud. And then there's him, the billionaire's son, who can't even pass middle school exams. The boy would sit quietly, staring down at his plate, wishing he could disappear. Money could buy everything except dignity. Then came the day that changed everything. His father, furious after yet another failed test, fired his personal tutor on the spot. The house fell silent, servants avoiding the boy's eyes as if failure was contagious. And that's when she walked in. She wasn't a tutor. She wasn't a professional. She was just a newly hired maid. Her job was to clean floors, polish furniture, and keep the mansion spotless. She was older, her face marked with years of struggle, her eyes sharp but kind. The staff whispered about her, calling her the new maid, but to the boy, she was invisible, just another shadow in a house filled with luxury. But one night, something unusual happened. The boy sat in the study, staring hopelessly at a pile of books. His exams were around the corner, and the weight of failure pressed on his chest like a stone. He slammed the book shut in frustration, and at that exact moment, the maid entered quietly with a tray of tea. She saw the torn pages, the scattered notes, and the tears he was trying to hide. She didn't say a word, just placed the tray down and looked at him. That gaze lingered, not of pity, but of understanding. The boy snapped at her. "What are you looking at? Do you think I'm stupid too?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "No, I think you've been trying to learn in the wrong way." The boy froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his teachers, not his tutors, not even his parents. They all either shouted or gave up. But this maid, a woman with no formal education, had spoken with such quiet certainty that it shook him. Curiosity lit in his eyes. "And what do you know about learning? You're just a maid." Her smile didn't fade. "I know enough. I know that the smartest people don't always come from books. Sometimes, the greatest lessons are not written on paper, but lived through life. And I can teach you that if you're willing to listen." The boy didn't reply. He thought it was absurd. What could she possibly teach him that dozens of highly paid tutors couldn't? But that night, as he lay awake in his room, her words echoed in his head. The wrong way. What if she was right? The next morning, he found her in the garden, sweeping leaves. "All right," he muttered. "If you think you can teach me, then show me. But if you fail, you're just like the rest of them." She put the broom aside, wiped her hands, and looked at him with calm determination.
"Deal," she said.
And so, The most unlikely teacher-student relationship began. But her methods were unlike anything he had ever experienced. She didn't start with textbooks. She didn't ask him to memorize definitions or formulas. Instead, she asked him questions, simple, ordinary questions about the world around him. "Why do you think this plant bends toward the sunlight?" she asked as they stood in the garden. He frowned, then guessed. "Because it needs light to grow?"
"Exactly," she said.
"That's science. Biology. You already know more than you think."
For the first time, he felt a spark.
The way she connected lessons to real life, to things he could touch, see, and feel, it made sense. She turned fractions into slices of bread, history into stories of courage, mathematics into the rhythm of footsteps. Slowly, his mind began to open. But it wasn't just academics she was teaching. She was shaping his character. "Do you know why you keep failing?" she asked one evening. He shook his head. "Because you're afraid of failure. You see every wrong answer as proof that you're worthless. But failure is not the end. It's the beginning. Every mistake is a step forward, not backward." Her words cut deep. No one had ever reframed failure like that for him. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. The boy started spending hours with her, soaking in every lesson, every story, every piece of wisdom. The mansion staff began whispering again, how strange it was to see the billionaire's son following the maid around like a student chasing a teacher. But he didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt hope. What he didn't realize, however, was that this unusual bond was about to shake not only his life, but the entire foundation of his family's pride. Because while he was learning lessons from her, the world outside was watching, waiting, and ready to judge. And soon, the test of his life was going to arrive, one that no money, no privilege, and no father's name could save him from. Days turned into weeks, and the billionaire's mansion had begun to feel different. The boy, who once locked himself in his room to hide from books, was now spending every morning with the maid in the garden, the library, or the kitchen. The silence of the house, once heavy with disappointment, was slowly being replaced by the sound of questions, discussions, and sometimes even laughter. But this transformation did not go unnoticed. His father began to hear whispers from the staff. At first, he dismissed them. "My son is wasting time with a maid? Impossible." Yet one evening, when he returned home early, he saw it with his own eyes. The boy sat at the dining table, listening intently as the maid cut an apple into pieces to explain fractions. He leaned forward, fascinated, his eyes wide in curiosity. The father's jaw tightened. For him, it was humiliating. He had paid millions to the best tutors, and yet his son sat learning from a maid? A maid of all people? To the father, this wasn't progress. It was shame. Later that night, he confronted his son. "Have you lost your mind? Do you even know how this looks? A billionaire's heir, studying with a servant? What will the world say about us?" The boy trembled, but did not lower his gaze. For the first time, he dared to answer back. "Maybe the world should say, I finally found a teacher who makes me understand." His father's face turned red with fury. No one in the family had ever spoken to him like that. But before he could explode, the maid stepped forward quietly and said, "Sir, if you allow me, I only want to help him. Nothing more." The father glared at her with disdain. "You are here to clean floors, not to teach my son. Stay in your place." The boy's heart sank. He wanted to shout, to defend her, but the maid placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Patience. Let your results speak louder than words." And so, the secret lessons continued, sometimes in hidden corners of the mansion, sometimes late at night when everyone else was asleep. The boy's hunger for knowledge grew like fire. He began reading on his own, solving problems, and even surprising himself with how quickly he understood concepts that once felt impossible. Every small success gave him confidence, and every failure no longer broke him. It motivated him. But as his mind sharpened, another battle began: society's judgment. At school, his classmates noticed the change. The boy who once sat at the back, silent and defeated, now raised his hand with answers. Teachers stared in disbelief when he explained concepts using examples no textbook had ever given. Slowly, whispers spread. What happened to him? How is he suddenly different? The cruel ones mocked him again. Don't get too excited. A dumb kid can never turn smart overnight. But this time, their words didn't crush him. He remembered what the maid had told him. Their voices are just noise. Keep walking. At home, however, the tension with his father grew heavier. The father couldn't stand the thought of credit going to a maid. In his eyes, it was an insult to his wealth and power. He called in another expensive tutor, determined to prove the maid irrelevant. But when the tutor tested the boy, the results stunned everyone. He answered every question with clarity, confidence, and reasoning that even the tutor admitted was rare. The father didn't clap. He didn't praise. He simply walked away, his pride too bruised to accept what was happening. But the maid smiled. She knew that this was only the beginning. One night, while sitting under the grand chandelier in the study, she spoke to him seriously. Listen to me. You are learning fast, but knowledge without purpose is wasted. Do you know why your father doesn't believe in you? The boy shook his head. Because you've never shown him that what you're learning can matter in the real world. Passing a test is one thing, but proving your worth in life, that is something else entirely. Her words planted a seed in his heart. From that day forward, he wasn't just studying for exams. He began to think about impact, about change, about what kind of man he wanted to become. As the final school exams approached, the entire household buzzed with nervous energy. The staff whispered bets about whether the boy would fail yet again or shock everyone. The father kept his distance, already preparing for disappointment. But the boy himself was different this time. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination. On the morning of the exams, the maid handed him a small, folded note.
For courage, she said.
He tucked it into his pocket without reading it, afraid he might lose focus. When he sat down in the exam hall, something strange happened. For the first time in his life, the questions didn't look like enemies. They looked like challenges he was ready to face. Every answer he wrote felt like a victory. Every page turned a battle won. By the end of the paper, he leaned back in his chair, his chest rising with pride. He had given everything he had. Weeks later, the results arrived. The father didn't even bother to open the envelope. He threw it onto the table and said coldly, "Go ahead, look at your failure." The boy's hands trembled as he tore it open. His eyes scanned the paper, and then they widened. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just passing, he had scored among the highest in his class. The room fell silent. The father stared at the sheet, his face unreadable. The staff gasped in disbelief. And the boy? He turned to the maid, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude. But before anyone could celebrate, the father's voice broke the silence. "This changes nothing," he said, his tone sharp. "One good result doesn't erase years of shame. And if anyone dares to say that a maid made my son succeed, I will not tolerate it." The boy froze. His joy shattered in an instant. He realized his greatest victory had only opened the door to his greatest challenge. Because now, it wasn't just about passing exams. It was about proving his worth to the one man who refused to see it. And what neither of them knew was that the maid carried a secret, one that would shake the billionaire's empire to its core and reveal why she had come to that mansion in the first place. The mansion was quieter than ever, but inside the boy's heart, a storm raged. For the first time, he had proven to the world that he wasn't a failure, that he could rise above the shadows of shame. Yet the one person whose approval he craved most, his father, refused to acknowledge it. Every word of dismissal still echoed in his ears. "This changes nothing." The maid watched him silently, her face calm but her eyes sharp, as if she had been expecting this. That evening, when the boy sat slumped in the study, she placed a hand on the table and said, "Do you really think this is the end?" "No, child. This is only the beginning." Sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought with pens and papers, but with the courage to stand tall against those who doubt you, even if that person is your own blood. The boy looked at her, his fists clenched. but he'll never see me as worthy. No matter what I do, no matter how much I change, he'll always see the failure." Her lips curved into a faint, almost knowing smile. Then it's time to show him something he cannot deny. And from that day, her lessons changed. She still guided him through books, still turned knowledge into living examples, but now she began teaching him about the world beyond the classroom, leadership, discipline, and vision. She told him stories of people who started with nothing, who built legacies with their bare hands. She taught him that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't paired with wisdom. "Money is like sand in your hands," she told him one night. "It slips away unless you know how to shape it into something lasting. That is the lesson your father cannot give you, but I can." As the weeks passed, the boy transformed. His posture grew taller, his speech more confident. He no longer avoided eye contact. At school, he wasn't just passing, he was excelling. Teachers began to call on him for insights. Classmates who once mocked him now listened with a mixture of envy and respect. The change was undeniable. But the real test came at home. One evening, his father hosted a gathering of business elites in the grand ballroom of the mansion. The chandeliers sparkled, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Powerful men and women filled the room, discussing deals worth millions. The boy, as usual, was expected to remain invisible, just a shadow at the edge of his father's empire. But this time, he didn't stay in the corner. When one of the guests made a remark about the next generation of leaders, the boy stepped forward, his voice steady. With respect, leadership is not inherited. It's earned. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to him. His father's gaze sharpened like a blade, ready to cut him down. But the boy continued. "I used to think I was worthless. I believed what everyone said about me, that I was a failure.
But failure is not the end.
It's the beginning of something greater, if you choose to rise from it." The guests exchanged curious glances. Some leaned forward with interest. The boy spoke with passion, with conviction, his words painting a picture of resilience and growth. By the time he finished, the silence in the hall was replaced by applause. Real applause. From people who mattered in his father's world. The father's pride was pricked, but his anger burned hotter. He dismissed the guests with a forced smile, and the moment they were gone, he confronted the boy in private. "Don't ever humiliate me like that again," he growled. "You think a few words make you wise? You're still nothing without my name." The boy held his ground. "Then I'll make my own name." It was the first time he had spoken such words. And though his voice trembled, his eyes did not waver. Later that night, the maid found him alone in the garden, staring at the stars. She sat beside him quietly before speaking. "Do you know why I came to this house?" He shook his head. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because I once knew someone exactly like you. Brilliant, but broken. A soul crushed under the weight of expectations. I couldn't save him then. But when I saw you, I knew I was given another chance." The boy's breath caught. Who was he? She looked away, her eyes glistening. "My son." He was lost because no one believed in him. Not even himself. "But you can be different. You can prove that a single person's belief is enough to rewrite destiny." The weight of her words pressed into his chest. Suddenly, her presence in his life made sense. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman carrying the scars of her past, determined not to let history repeat itself. From that night, the boy's drive reached new heights. He studied harder, worked longer, and trained himself not just to succeed in school, but to master skills his father valued in business. Public speaking, negotiation, critical thinking, he absorbed it all like a sponge. The maid became not just his teacher, but his compass. And then came the day of the greatest revelation. A letter arrived at the mansion, sealed with the emblem of the most prestigious university in the country. The boy opened it with trembling hands. Acceptance. Not just acceptance, scholarship. Full ride. Earned on merit, not money. His heart leapt. This was proof. Proof that he wasn't just a billionaire's son.
He was his own man.
He rushed to show his father, but when he placed the letter on the desk, his father's face darkened. "Do you think this impresses me?" I could buy that university if I wanted. What matters is business, power, legacy. The boy's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to fight, but then the maid stepped forward. Her eyes blazed with a fire no one had seen before. "Enough," she said firmly. "You measure everything in money, but you fail to see the truth standing in front of you. Your son has achieved what no amount of wealth could buy: respect, knowledge, and resilience. If you cannot see that, then perhaps you don't deserve to call yourself his father." The father's face went pale.
Never had a servant spoken to him like that.
The air in the room was heavy, every second like a ticking clock. For a moment, it seemed he might explode with rage. But instead, he turned away in silence. The boy looked at the maid, tears welling in his eyes. "Why would you risk everything for me?" She smiled, her voice trembling with both pain and pride. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible. And I swore I'd never let another child with potential fade into the shadows." At that moment, the boy understood. This wasn't just about passing tests or proving himself to his father. It was about becoming the man he was meant to be, the man she believed he could become. And as he stood there, holding the letter in his hands, he realized something profound. His story was no longer just about failure. It was about transformation. And the maid who entered his life as a servant had become the very reason his destiny was rewritten. The world would remember him not as the billionaire son who failed every test, but as the boy who rose because someone dared to believe in him when no one else would.